We've got Tim Kurkijan of ESPN. The Guardians with a 3-game series with the Mets this weekend. Our old buddy will face our old buddy Carlos Carrasco. And there's the great Tim Kurkijan of ESPN. Tim, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
I'm well, fellas. How you doing?
We're doing very well. By the way, Tim, I worked with your son Jeff at the radio station here in Cleveland for a number of years. So
Jeff really misses Cleveland. He had a great time there. He went to Las Vegas after that. Now he's in Philadelphia, and he's doing really, really well. But he enjoyed his time in Cleveland. And I don't know if you guys know this, but the first year he was there, the Cavs won the NBA championship. And the Indians went to the World Series. Then he went to Vegas, and the Golden Knights, if that's what they're called, went to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Wow.
And then he went to Philadelphia, and the Eagles went to the Super Bowl, and the Phillies went to the World Series. My son is clearly a good luck charm. I've had people call me from Seattle and say, "Can your son move here?" Because good things happen when he arrives.
Well, just don't let him go to New York. Even though I'm a born and raised New Yorker, I don't like any of the New York teams, and I want them all to lose. So please keep him out of New York. That's it. Philadelphia is fine.
Okay, very good.
Tim, a lot to get to with the Guardians. Obviously, they've had a very disappointing start to this season. A lot of the young players that performed last year have not gotten it done. They added Mike Zunino at catcher. He's been a disaster. Let's start there at catcher. Bo Naylor is killing it in AAA right now. He had a cup of coffee last year, didn't do well, but he got barely any at-bats. Are you surprised? You know, they called up Tanner Bybee. They called up Logan Allen. They've been more aggressive with bringing up their minor leaguers and not being scared to start the clock. Are you surprised that they haven't gone with Bo Naylor? Because their catching production, both offensively and defensively, has been awful.
Yeah, the defense is the worrisome part because Mike Zunino's always been a good defensive catcher, but those shoulder issues, I was told in spring training, are really bothersome to him. And if you can't throw these days, especially with more stolen bases, bigger bases, the whole pick rule and all that stuff, I think you're in a little trouble. Now, we also know Zunino, he can get really hot, and he can hit 6 homers in a week. That's how good he can be when he's swinging it. But when he's not, he hits under 200 and doesn't get on base very much either. So, yes, at times, the Guardians are going to have to look at this and say, all right, are we getting enough production? Do we have to make a move? I think Zunino gets a little more time.
Okay.
Tim, I asked, Bull and some of the baseball guys, Jay, when we look at this, the roster and how the Guardians are always able to find a pitcher. They're always able to develop pitching. They, as soon as they leave, we've been talking about Bieber, maybe trading him to get a bat or get something in return from him. One of the things that we're getting is, hey, you take a look at the guys that they are able to develop. They can do it when it comes to pitching, but when it comes to power bats or guys in the corner outfield, why is it that they're so able and adept at developing pitching, but it doesn't seem like they've been able to develop power bats when it seems like it would be more difficult to develop pitchers than hitters?
Yeah, they're really good at bringing pitchers in, and obviously they have to get Tristan McKenzie, they got to get Savali back, they got to get their pitching straightened out. Because right now they are a really weak offensive team. Fellas, you know this. They've hit 24 homers the whole season. The Rays have hit more than 3 times as many homers as the Guardians have hit. The team's hitting 228. They're second to the last in the league in runs scored. And we all know they don't have a particularly powerful lineup. But last year, they figured out ways to score runs. They stole bases. They put the ball in play like no other team. And it's possible some other teams have recognized this is how they score runs. We are going to try to combat that. Well, they need a lot of help offensively if they're going to run down, the Twins in that division. I think they should feel great that they've played this poorly, and they're still only 3.5 games behind the Twins. The pitching's going to get much better. The bullpen is fine. They're just going to have to get some people going. And those guys you talked about last year, Jimenez and Rosario, guys who were really good last year and haven't been nearly as good, they're going to have to pick it up if they're going to make it back to the playoffs this year.
Tim, I'm filling in for Jay Crawford today. Jay woke up with a migraine, but he wanted me to send a hello and he misses you from your guys' days together at ESPN. So that is my message from Jay Crawford. Do you have a Jay story, by the way, before I get into my real question?
Yeah, I will tell you that Jay was a dear friend of mine. We went to we did a show in like Phoenix or something doing the Giants. And Jay still plays baseball at a pretty high level. So he jumped in against a pitching machine throwing, it was at least 85. It might have been 90. And he said, I can hit this. And I'm thinking, Jay's a good ball player. He's a good athlete. I'm not disputing. I said, I'm not sure he can hit 90. And after about 3 pitches, he hit a bullet. He hit a rocket. And I said, all right, there's Jay Crawford for you. And I played catch with him a few times. He can throw a baseball. So it's always good to find someone who's in the business, who's actually played at least one of the games. It's not necessary to have played in order to be a good writer, analyst, reporter, but it sure helps if you have played before, if you know what 90 miles an hour looks like, and Jay Crawford does.
Jay talks about his playing days all the time, so I'm glad we got some real confirmation that he actually does know how to throw. Tim, my real question is this. You've been covering Major League Baseball forever. You've interacted, and you know these managers better than we can ever imagine. What makes Terry Francona so different and so special and so successful as a manager in today's game?
Yeah, he's just got a great feel for people, and that's the most important thing about being a manager. You have to know what button to push on this guy, because every guy has a different button and he needs it pushed at different times. And Tito has always figured out how to do that with his players. And that is a gift that he has and a lot of people don't. He used to tell me that he would play cribbage before games all the time. As you guys know, he played with Dustin Pedroia. He played with Jonathan Papelbon, who was so bad at it. They let him in the game, and as Tito said, I got a new finished basement built because all the money I won from Papelbon playing cribbage before the game. But he told me you can learn a lot about a baseball player, what he might do on the field, by watching him and playing cribbage with him before the game. I've never heard a manager say it quite like that. But that's Tito's greatest gift, is his ability to deal with people. And, of course, his ability to deflect attention away from his team when things aren't going poorly. Now, I hope this comes across properly. If it doesn't, I apologize. Years ago, no, I'm not even going to tell the story. I'll get in trouble, so forget it. I just want you to know that Tito is the absolute best at meeting people, recognizing what they can do and they can't do, and it's always self-deprecating on his part to deflect the attention away from his players so they can go out and play.
Tim, when you look at the Guardians are really interesting, right? They've got a loaded 40-man roster. They've got a ton of these middle infield prospects that don't really have room to play. They did extend Jimenez. Rosario's going to be gone at the end of the year. I assume they're going to trade Shane Bieber this offseason because he's got 1 year left, and they're not going to lock him up at this point, especially with he's not pitching that well, but they couldn't afford him if he was. And yet they have some obvious needs. We've talked, right field certainly, potentially catcher if Bo Naylor ends up not being the long-term answer. What are you expecting from them in terms of trades? I know some of it has to do with how well they're playing, but what does the next year, would you say, look like in terms of what they're going to do in trades?
Well, they're in a tricky spot.
Yeah.
Because they're in a lousy division. The Royals are really bad. The Tigers aren't very good. The White Sox look terrible these days. Yeah. And the Twins are a decent club. So it's very difficult for the Guardians, who made the playoffs last year, to be within shouting distance of first place and in their division, a chance to make the playoffs, and then punt at the end of July. I just don't see that happening. I don't think they should do that. If they have a chance to make the playoffs and you can win in the playoffs with great pitching, if their pitching is really good, I think they have to stay with it and not deal until they are absolutely certain that they're not making the playoffs this year. And I think in a weak division like this, I think they're going to be in the race all year because I just
Agreed.
don't see a team good enough to pull away.
Tim, we talked about trades and different things. We were in here just playing around one day. We're doing this show, and I said, "Look, why don't you just trade for Ohtani, right? Like just pack up your little prospects."
Well, the Angels are doing pretty well right now.
I know they're. At the time, I'm like, but is there a big enough package or? I would trade anybody for him, right? Even if it was a rental for six or 7, 8 months, right? When you look at his talent level, do you believe that, A, there are teams out there that have enough that would trade for him, or B, is there no package that's big enough for him based on what he can give you?
Yeah, I don't think the Indians have a big enough package now to trade for a guy who's only going to be there for a few months. That doesn't mean they don't need him. They could put a package together, but it wouldn't make any sense if it took 6 guys to get him and he plays 3 months and leaves.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the potential. So you can't do that if you're the Guardians. And my guess is, and I saw Ohtani yesterday in Baltimore, he hit another home run. He's so unbelievably good that I think the Angels are going to do everything they can to hang on to him and try to convince him to stay. Now, the only way or the best way that's going to happen is for them to stay in the playoff race, and they have an outside chance to make the playoffs. If they can convince him, hey, we made the playoffs, we're going to give you $600 million to stay. You can pitch. You can hit here. You love pitching on this mound. You love hitting in this ballpark. Trust me, fellas, Ohtani's comfort level is really important about, he doesn't necessarily like to hit at Dodger Stadium. Look at his numbers at Yankee Stadium. They're not particularly good. He's not going to go to a place where he doesn't feel 100% comfortable. So I think the Angels at least have an outside chance to keep him, and that's why I don't think they're going to trade him before the trade deadline unless they are hopelessly out of it. And then the packages that could come in would be amazing, but they're going to have to come from a team that is also willing to pay him $500 to $600 million because they're not going to give up 6 players to get him for 3 months.
Yeah, by the way, I think he'd look really good at Wrigley Field.
Tim,
is that the number? Is it $600 million? Is that what it? I mean, you have to. He's a great pitcher and a great hitter, right? I mean, could it be even over $600 million? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Was that the guess?
Anything is possible. We've never seen this guy before, ever. Yeah. I mean, this is Babe Ruth in 1920.
Yeah.
By the way, if we let Babe Ruth in 1920 pitch, and be the DH 6 days a week, he would be doing what Ohtani did. I really believe that. He wouldn't be throwing 100 with a slider from hell and everything else, but he would be doing – not the point. The point is we've never seen anyone like Ohtani. So if you break it down, and this is way too simplistic, if he were just a hitter, he would get close to $300 million a year. If he were just a hitter, he would get close to $300 million a year. Put them together, that's 600. That's a guess. We're all guessing, but – if you're a team that needs somebody to change the course of your franchise, who better than him?
Yeah.
Tim, you're on the call this Sunday for Sunday Night Baseball, Guardians, Mets. When you guys travel and do these productions, what makes coming to Cleveland and Progressive Field such a unique experience?
All right, well, I'm not on the call. I'll be doing baseball tonight from Bristol on Sunday. No worries. The answer is I love coming to Cleveland, period. Not just because my son used to work there, but because I love that ballpark. I love being around Tito and his team, and there's no substitute for being at the ballpark. So, and I've been to Cleveland so many times. Opening day 1982, the Indians were terrible at the time. And my team that I covered, the Rangers, were awful also. And the Rangers beat them on opening day, and there were 74,000 people in Cleveland on opening day 1982. Man. And then the next day, there were like 3,000 people there. It was one of the great drop-offs I've ever seen. And by the way, opening day 82, George Wright of the Rangers, a rookie center fielder, went 3 for 4 against the Indians on opening day. So I went up to him and I said, George, did you have a good time today? And he goes, yeah, I've never been to a major league game before. So the first game he'd ever been to in his life, he got 3 hits in it. Think about that for a second.
That's crazy.
That is incredible. Tim, I want to ask you about Shane Bieber because he's pitching this weekend, obviously. And he's coming off his worst start. He gave up a ton of hits. His velocity's been down all year. How concerned should Guardians fans be about Shane Bieber right now?
Mildly concerned because his stuff is too good to get hit around, at least on the level that he is now. I thought he was, and I still do think he's a Cy Young contender going into the season. What I've always been so impressed by, at least according to the people I've talked to, is he'll come back from the offseason and suddenly he's got a slider, or suddenly he's got a split, or suddenly he's got a different look to his changeup, or whatever. So he invents stuff as he goes, and I'm just not sure that creativity is still there. Now, I fully expect him to have a really good year, and let's face it, fellas, he's got to have a really good year. And then everyone else has to fall in line, as we talked about. You got to get some people healthy in that rotation. Otherwise, the Guardians are in trouble. Bieber has to be great if they're going to make the playoffs, and I think he will be. He just had a little bit of a hiccup his last time out.
Tim, another team in this division, you mentioned the White Sox. They've just, they made all these trades a few years ago. They got all these young players. Some of them have not panned out. They've had a lot of injuries. It seems like they have weird chemistry, bad defense. But they have a lot of chips potentially at the trade deadline. They probably have the most chips. So whether it's Dylan Cease, whether it's Moncada, Tim Anderson, are you expecting them to be big sellers at this deadline?
Again, Jerry Reinsdorf, their owner, is so wildly competitive. He lost a game yesterday, I was told by someone who was there, and he was furious that they lost to the Guardians yesterday because they had built a tiny bit of momentum and then didn't follow it up. I don't see Jerry Reinsdorf punting on this season until he's absolutely convinced that the White Sox have no chance to make the playoffs. Right now, they have no chance to make the playoffs, but we have to see where they are 2 months from now. And then you're right. Lance Lynn might go somewhere. Moncada could help somebody. Tim Anderson could help anybody. I would be surprised if they were to trade Dylan Cease. That guy's stuff is fantastic, even though he hadn't been great this year. But if they're interested in, contending long term, they have to keep Cease. They have to keep their best players and try again next year. But this year is not over. It's really never over in this division with no dominant team.
Speaking of teams who may not have a chance, Tim, the Oakland A's are
the worst team I've ever seen.
There's something else. We'll put it that way. Bull told me before the year they had the worst roster he had ever seen.
I said they were going to break the Mets, the 62 Mets were 40 and 120. They're on pace for about 35, 37 wins now.
I guess my question is, Tim, is this the worst Major League Baseball team you've ever come across?
Well, you guys got to remember, as a beat guy for 10 years, I covered the 88 Orioles, who lost their first 21 games to start the season. No team had lost more than 14 in a row to start. They went to 21. So after 18 in a row, Frank Robinson, great Indian manager, he took the writers out to dinner. I just think he needed to change the subject. So during dinner at 0-18, I say to Frank, I said, Frank, has anyone interesting called you during this losing streak? And he said, yeah, the president called me today. So Frank was a big kidder. So I pushed him 3 times on it. I said, did the president call you? He said, damn it, the president of the United States called me today. I said, Frank, what did he say? He said, Frank, I know what you're going through. And Frank said, Mr. President, you got no idea what I'm going through. That's how bad the Orioles were. Now, they only lost 107 games that year. I think the A's are going to lose more than that, but I'm not going to 40 and 120. That's a little bit too much. But to be serious for a second, this is not healthy when any team is this bad. All right. As you guys know, one of the great beauties of baseball is that bad teams beat good teams all the time.
Yep.
No bad team ever came in and beat LeBron's Cavalier team when they were really good. Came into Cleveland Arena, whatever it's called, and beat them. That just doesn't happen in basketball, and it doesn't happen nearly as often in football. But in baseball, bad teams go on the road and sweep a good team every once in a while. And you go, how did that happen? Well, the A's can't do that. It's like an upset when they win a baseball game or certainly a series. And that's very unhealthy when the gap, which I've never seen a gap wider between the really good teams and really bad teams, which we see today. And I repeat, that is not healthy for the game.
Yeah.
You know, we go to the historically, bad to the historically good. In the American League East, is led by the Rays. I mean, they jump out to one of the best starts that we've seen in a long time. How good
Red Sox in last place, 4 games over 500.
How
They'd
good
be tied
is
for first in the
That's
Central.
crazy, Bull.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
good, Tim, is this division, the American League East?
Yeah, it's the best division in baseball by far. There's a bad team in every division in baseball except the AL East, and it is filled with plus 500 teams. And if the Red Sox were in the Central, of course, in the American League, they'd be in first place. I think they'd be the best team in the National League Central right now also. And I said at the beginning of the year, not like that matters what I say at the beginning of the year, but I thought 3 teams from the AL East would make the playoffs like last year, and it's possible. Unlikely, but possible. 4 teams can make the playoffs out of the American League East this year. Again, I saw the Orioles yesterday. They are loaded with talent. The Blue Jays are loaded. The Yankees are 11-5 in May. They finally started to put it together. And the Rays are off to a historically good start. So I think the Red Sox are going to end up finishing last in that division. I think they're going to win 83 or 84 games. And I think that's going to be the best division of baseball all season.
What's crazy, too, Tim, is like the Rays have lost Springs for the year. They've lost Rasmussen for the year. Glasnow hasn't pitched yet. For Toronto, Alek Manoah's been pretty awful so far. I picked him as my Cy Young. That looks really bad at the moment. And yet those teams are winning. It seems like whoever the Rays put into pitch, we talk about the Guardians developing pitching. The Rays are even better. It's like whoever they throw in there pitches well. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really amazing how well they draft, but also how well they develop. And pitchers go there and suddenly get better. Kevin Cash, the manager, has something to do with that. Kyle Snyder, the pitching coach, does. Their analytics department is really, really good. But there is a concern now. Jeffrey Springs with Tommy John, and Tyler Glasnow coming back from Tommy John, and Drew Rasmussen is hurt. And I'm not suggesting there's anything nefarious going on here, but that's a troublesome situation that all these pitchers go there, get better real good and real quickly, but then a bunch of them get hurt. I'm not sure where that connection is.
It's wild. Again, Sunday Night Baseball, ESPN, the Guardians and Mets this Sunday, baseball tonight before that. Tim, we really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Tim.
much. Appreciate it.
Oh, okay, fellas, thanks, and I'll see you in Cleveland on July the 4th. I'm doing a Braves-Guardians game on the radio there, so I'll see you there if not before.